All right, let's jump right in. We're about to look at an ancient Vedic text. But what if I told you this isn't about some mystical ritual? What if, according to one really fascinating interpretation, it's actually a highly technical blueprint for how the cosmos itself works? So here it is. This is the verse at the heart of it all. It talks about gods, a king named Soma, a mysterious 13th month that doesn't exist, and this sinner who sells the Soma. Now, on the surface, it sounds like beautiful ancient poetry, right? But the interpretation we're exploring today says, nope, it's something else entirely. And that's the big question we're asking here. Are we just looking at some ancient mythology, a ritual whose meaning has been lost to time? Or, just maybe, is this poetic language a kind of sophisticated code, a code that's actually describing a physical, scientific process on a massive cosmic scale? Okay, section 1. Let's really start to unpack this riddle. You know, the language feels symbolic for a reason, and to get to the physics of it, we first have to wrap our heads around the basic premise of this really unique interpretation. The core idea is actually pretty simple, but it's also profound. It says that every single word in that verse, the gods, the king, the month, even the sinner, is a stand-in for a physical thing or a process. They're all part of a vocabulary being used to describe the birth of a star. So we're not just translating words here, we are decoding a scientific manual. So, to crack this code, we've got to define our terms first. Let's take a look at how this ancient vocabulary translates into the language of astrophysics, because this is where it starts to get good. First things first, where is all of this supposed to be happening? The text talks about a place called Hiranyagarbha, but in this interpretation, that's not some mythical heavenly realm. It's the technical term for a nebula. You know, one of those huge clouds of gas and dust where stars are born? This is our stage. Now, what's this Soma that's being purchased? Well, you can forget any other definitions you might have heard. In this context, Soma is a specific particle. It starts out as this cool, slow gas, but when it gets energized, bam, it becomes luminous and active. The source material actually draws a direct parallel between Soma and an electron. And this is the key that really unlocks the whole puzzle. The verse mentions a 13th month, or Masa. This interpretation argues that Masa has absolutely nothing to do with time. Instead, it refers to a type of ray or a particle. And this is crucial. There aren't just 12 of them. There's a special 13th type that acts as the currency in this whole cosmic exchange. So we've got our setting, our particle, and our currency. Now let's look at the transaction itself. This is where the physics starts to get really, really interesting. Okay, let's walk through this step by step. So picture this. You've got 12 standard Masa rays, and they're all flowing in a nice, orderly clockwise direction. But then this special 13th ray shows up from a completely different direction, the east, and it's moving counter-clockwise. This opposing particle goes and collides with some matter in the north, and that collision is the catalyst. It literally forces that matter to spit out these energetic Soma particles, which then start flowing clockwise themselves. And this contrast, it's the core dynamic of the entire process. It's everything. While those 12 rays are just the system's standard operating procedure, that 13th ray is an anomaly. It moves in the opposite direction, and it acts as the trigger, the payment, if you will, that forces the release of Soma. It's this incredible picture of opposing forces creating something totally new. And this brings us right back to that line in the original verse. Why is the seller of Soma called a sinner? Well, it's because the matter up in the north that got smacked by the 13th ray and had to give up its Soma particle, it's now fundamentally changed. It has lost a key component, and that makes it unstable, chaotic, unpredictable. In this physical model, sinful is just another word for unstable. So, a particle has been ejected, the source material is now unstable. This whole purchase has thrown the entire system completely out of balance. So, what happens next? Well, exactly what you'd think, pure chaos. The release of this super energetic Soma particle isn't some neat and tidy event. The whole nebula, or Hiranyagarbha, is now in a state of absolute turmoil. So as these new Soma particles are rushing out, they run smack into another set of particles, which the text calls minutiae. These things are described as being irregular, uncontrolled, basically a mess, and they desperately try to grab onto the high-energy Soma, but they just can't. And in the attempt, they lose what little stability and energy they had, sending the entire system spiraling even deeper into chaos.
And this is the crucial point, right? You've just created a ton of energy, but it's wild, it's out of control. The system can't form a stable star like this. So how do you harness all that chaos? How do you possibly bring order back to the nebula?
The answer, at least according to this text, lies in a very, very specific number. And this is really the final piece of this whole cosmic puzzle. 8, the number that brings stability out of chaos. But how? The text describes this whole series of attempts to control those wild Soma particles. A first wave is sent out to try and capture them, and it fails. Then a second, then a third, all the way up to a 7th wave. They all fail. It's only when a combined 8th wave is finally generated that the system has enough force and enough structure to finally capture and control that elusive Soma. And this is where you see the true genius of the language. The Sanskrit word for 8, ashta, is said to come from the verbal root ash, which means to obtain. The number isn't just some random quantity. Its very name describes its function. 8 is, quite literally, the number of obtaining the Soma. How cool is that?
And just like that, order is restored. The Soma is captured. Those previously chaotic minutiae particles, they're now stable, integrated into a new, larger system. They can finally manage the flow of energy properly. The star has achieved a stable state.
But listen to this, because this is the most staggering claim of the whole interpretation. This entire process, which is described on the scale of a giant star, is apparently a perfect mirror of what happens on a quantum scale. An external force strikes an atom, a luminous electron, our Soma, is emitted, and the original atom becomes an unstable ion, our sinful stellar. It suggests this isn't just a blueprint for a star. It might be a blueprint for a fundamental pattern of energy exchange throughout the entire universe. So, when you get right down to it, here's the thing. We've just decoded one interpretation of one ancient verse. Now, whether you see it as poetry or you see it as physics, it really pushes us to ask a much bigger question. What other knowledge might be encoded in these ancient texts, just waiting for the right key to unlock it? It really leaves you wondering, what else have we forgotten?